Well, good evening once again from our NBC News headquarters here in New York. Day 652 of the Trump administration, and heading into this final weekend before Election Day, we are seeing two very different visions for America from our presidents, number 44 and 45. Tonight, Trump and Obama are both on the campaign trail rallying voters on behalf of candidates in key races. The current president held rallies in West Virginia and Indiana. During both stops, he made a point of touting the strong economic numbers, today's new job numbers especially, but then he went big and deep on immigration.
The Democrats want to invite caravan after caravan. And you see we have more caravans forming. You do see that. Gee, I wonder how that happens. They want these caravans full of illegal aliens to flood into our country. A blue wave would equal a crime wave, very simple. And a red wave equals jobs and security.
So there you have it. And former President Obama made appearances today in Florida and Georgia, striking back with an attack on Trump and his message.
In the closing weeks of this election, we have seen repeated, constant, incessant, nonstop attempts to divide us with rhetoric that is designed to make us angry and make us fearful, with images and rhetoric that are designed to exploit our history of racial and ethnic and religious division, to try to pit us against one another. The good news is, in 4 days, Georgia, you can reject that politics.
Former president losing his voice. He's been using his indoor voice for 2 years now. On the topic of immigration, the mythical invasion of our southern border that the president has been warning of, he seemed to walk back a remark he made yesterday, a remark we reported on here last night, suggesting U.S. troops might open fire at migrants at the border who throw stones.
Mr. President, are you really okay with the U.S. military firing on the caravan people?
No, they won't have to fire. What I don't want is I don't want these people throwing rocks. I didn't say shoot, but they do that with us. They're going to be arrested for a long time.
While President Trump is out on the road trying to help Republican candidates, there is an explosive new report out tonight from Vanity Fair in what may be strategic pre-midterm timing. Trump's former lawyer turned enemy Michael Cohen tells the magazine he has personally heard Trump use racist language before he took office. The author, Emily Jane Fox, who is standing by to join us live here tonight, writes Cohen, quote, said the president privately uttered chilling racist language in one-on-one conversations. She continues, during our conversation, Cohen recalled a discussion at Trump Tower following the then candidate's return from a campaign rally during the 2016 election cycle. Cohen had watched the rally on TV and noticed the crowd was largely Caucasian. The article quotes Cohen as saying, I told Trump that the rally looked vanilla on television. Trump responded, that's because black people are too stupid to vote for me. Cohen also told Vanity Fair about an exchange with Trump involving an expression similar to one that the president was accused of using earlier this year. Cohen reportedly said Trump asked him to, quote, name one country run by a black person that is not an S-hole. Then he added, name one city. Cohen also recalled a conversation in the late 2000s when he and Trump were traveling to Chicago for a Trump International Hotel board meeting. Quote, we were going from the airport to the hotel and we drove through what looked like a rougher neighborhood. Trump made a comment to me saying that only the blacks could live like this. You'll recall Cohen and Trump had a rather bitter split amid the federal investigation into Cohen. A reminder, he has pleaded guilty to charges related to campaign finance violations that he contends were carried out at Trump's direction. Tonight, there has been no response as of yet from the White House, but a source inside the Trump organization told NBC News Cohen's allegations were, quote, More lies from a serial liar. Well, with that, let's bring in our leadoff panel for a Friday night. Three returning veterans: Ken Thomas, political reporter for the Associated Press; the aforementioned Emily Jane Fox, senior reporter at Vanity Fair. Her recent book, by the way, is Born Trump: Inside America's First Family. And Jason Johnson, politics editor at The Root. Good evening. Welcome to you all, and thanks for coming on. Ken, how you've been switched over to covering just these midterms from your usual beat. So I ask you, with that in mind, how unusual is this to have two presidents basically head-to-head, race for race, as we go into a midterm election on Tuesday?
It's striking. I mean, you have to go back decades to find an ex-president willing to go this hard against the current president in an election. And, you know, you look at what has happened in the past. I mean, President Trump led the birther movement against President Obama when President Obama was campaigning in 2016 against then Republican nominee Trump. He called him a con artist. These are two people who don't like each other, and they essentially represent, you know, polar opposites of this country and completely different views. So it's just been striking to see them go out at each other, and you know they're trying to, you know, essentially prevent. President Trump is trying to prevent what had happened to President Obama in 2010 and 2014 and run against history and the tides that often sweep against a first-term president.
Jason, I want to read you something that Peter Baker wrote over at the New York Times about the former president. Quote, Mr. Obama has vented his exasperation loud and often, assailing his successor in a sharper, more systematic way, arguably, than any former president has done in 3/4 of a century. Of course, Jason, the folks who are part of Obama's camp point out that, in their view, the need has never been this great. My question for you is, do you think it's convertible into votes? And at some point, when is early voting going to change how we campaign and the use of big gun surrogates like this?
Well, Brian, it's two things. One, I've always said that the greatest long-term negative consequence of the Trump administration is the end of norms. We used to live in a time where presidents could safely go into the night and they wouldn't say anything about their successors, right? Bush didn't say much about Clinton. Clinton wouldn't say much about Bush and Obama, et cetera, et cetera. But Trump has pretty much based much of his campaign and even his life as president of the United States on attacking the previous administration. So that has brought Obama out in a very different way. Now, as far as early voting goes, this is a really interesting element of campaigns that we've seen, and I think it's going to change, Brian, after these 2018 midterms. I am in Florida now. I've been in Georgia throughout this campaign. In Georgia, you have over 600,000 first-time voters or voters who did not vote in 2014 who have already early voted. You've got states, you've got small red counties in Texas where the early voting has already succeeded the actual on election day voting in 2014. At one point, we used to worry that early voting was actually cannibalizing same day voting. I don't think that's going to be the mathematics anymore. I think we're seeing a point where early voting and same day voting have to be seen when they happen. We can't assume that they are sort of working against each other as they have in the past.
Jason, you're so right. And going back to your first point, for folks who may be new to following politics at the molecular level, because they've all been men, it's been more than just a gentleman's agreement. 43, for example, vowed to hold his silence while Obama was president. They have kept to this. It's been a tradition.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, and everybody thought that was the reasonable way to operate. And actually it is. I mean, part of what makes America great is the safe and clean transition from one administration to the next. If we get into a situation, which now Trump has opened, where everybody feels free to attack the person who follows them, to disrespect them, to try to dismantle their entire legacy, it erodes what makes us a functioning democracy. And now this is going to be pretty standard. I expect Barack Obama to be one of the #1 campaigners for every single midterm as long as Donald Trump remains in office.
Ken, I got a quick one for you. The president was asked about his comments perhaps promoting violence. He turned it around, and apparently it's a journalist's fault. We'll show this exchange, talk about it on the other side.
Half of Americans say you're encouraging politically motivated violence because they use speech.
No, you know what? You're creating violence by your question. You are creating you. And also, a lot of the reporters are creating violence by not writing the truth. The fake news is creating violence.
So there we go again, Ken. And last night he just came out and said the momentum had been stopped by, of course, the 15 pipe bombs and the death of 11 innocent souls in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to follow the logic, but it speaks to, the view that the president has that attacking the media is a good strategy in a midterm campaign and in any electoral setting, really. And so, I think he feels that he can make this argument that his views are not being accurately expressed, and that any story that he disagrees with is just he can just set aside simply because he doesn't like the media that's serving.
And it was our other guest tonight, Emily Jane Fox, whose work posted this afternoon has spiked the news cycle tonight and probably will into the weekend. And Emily, I guess the question as a viewer's advocate everyone's going to ask coming away from it is, where was Cohen this whole time?
Well, for the last 6 months or so, after the FBI executed search warrants on his hotel room, his home, and his office, at the advice of counsel, he's been silent. He has been focusing on his case, keeping his head down. The explanation that Cohen gave me when I asked him that question several times when we sat down earlier this week was, look, I've been following my lawyer's advice. I did not say anything when the president attacked me and my credibility, when his attorney attacked me and my credibility. But he, like the rest of us, has been watching the president ratchet up his rhetoric over the last few weeks. He is the son of a Holocaust survivor and saw the tragic events in Pittsburgh unfold over the weekend, and then the president's insensitive remarks following that. And he felt like he knew that what the president was saying publicly was bad. What the president had said to him privately was worse. And ahead of the midterms, he felt like he wanted to speak up.
And I heard you say earlier tonight on this network, you have, since hitting the publish button, heard from two people inside the Trump world saying, and I don't want to give the synopsis in words that you wouldn't use, but saying some version of, yeah, these quotes read about right to us.
Yeah, I heard from people who had formerly worked with the president who basically said that tracks, that those were similar in tone, in substance, and in style to things that then Mr. Trump had said to them when he was their boss.
And so do you think Mr. Cohen has reached a decision about throwing it out there, about whatever legal jeopardy may come? He sees the bigger challenge, he sees the biggest threat in front of him in the form of his old boss.
I think that Cohen is squarely focused on the sentencing, which will happen next month. I think that he would not say anything now that he deemed would put him in legal jeopardy ahead of the sentencing. That is really what I think is the biggest obstacle facing him, the thing that he is most concerned about right now in terms of what it means for his family, what it means for him. But I will say it is sort of a risk for him to say anything and say anything so publicly and so inflammatory ahead of that sentencing. And to me, that said, this is a guy who hadn't said anything for months leading up to this. But before the election, he wanted to tell his story, and whatever legal jeopardy that could put him in, that was more important.
Hey, Jason, there's no joy in asking this, but reading these quotes in Emily's piece, how many Americans are kind of saying to themselves, yeah, that sounds about right?
I'd say by the latest polls, about 49%. I mean, the poll after poll after poll has shown that most Americans think that the president is divisive or racially hostile. What I have always maintained, look, none of this is news. You can speak to David K. Johnson, who's been on this network. The president's history of racist statements is legendary. But what has always been more problematic, look, being a racist is not a disqualifier to be serving public office. We've had lots of racists, right? But his policies are the manifestation of his personal biases. And that's where the problem comes into play, where since he believes that black people are inferior, he believes that countries led by black people are inferior, that informs where the military goes. That informs how sensitive he is to policies that affect African Americans. That informs how sensitive he is to policies that affect Jewish people and poor people and everything else like that. When the president's bigotry manifests itself in policy, that is when our democracy is in danger. And that is, unfortunately, what is made even more crystal clear by this article, that his biases will always lead his policy as opposed to a love for country or a belief that he has to represent everyone who lives in the United States of America.
Emily, I'm guessing there's a moment that comes when you hit send on a story like the one you posted today, and you know there's going to be attacks from the right that this is a straight-up 4 days out, pre-midterm hit job, and what's your defense for that?
I think that it's newsworthy. This is someone who worked for the president for more than a decade, saying that behind the scenes he knows of things that the president, he said, told him were incredibly racist. If this is considered by them a hit job by Michael Cohen, that is their issue with Michael Cohen. But I think the explanation that I got from Cohen was, I've seen what has happened over the past few weeks, particularly over the last week, and leading up to the election, I couldn't keep silent anymore.
Hey, Ken, if you were a betting man, do you think we'll see a White House response to this at all? Do you think it'll be in the form of something from the press secretary? Or might we see something on Twitter from the president overnight in an Indianapolis hotel room?
Could be a combination of both. I think they're likely to seek to discredit Michael Cohen and say, you know, he's a convicted felon now and he doesn't have any credibility. And, you know, they've cast him as a liar before, so I'm sure that they'll continue to do so.
Starting us off on a Friday night at the end of another long week, though, nothing compared to the week we have ahead of us. Our thanks to our front three guests, Ken Thomas, Emily Jane Fox, Jason Johnson. It's always a pleasure having all of you. Thank you so much. And coming up,